asks a question. She says, "Do you think Shanahan is a leader?" Now, I'm assuming that Grant probably earlier had conversation about Shanahan not being a leader. Otherwise, I don't know why this conversation would come up. Um, and so I'm assuming also, given how much Grant and I used to disagree about this particular topic with Shanahan, and what great conversation it provided, that he said Shanahan is not a leader as well. So now that we've gotten the context of, or the context that I'm assuming, what do you think, Larry? Do you think Shanahan's a leader?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm in that room. I talk to guys on the record, off the record. I've never heard anybody but, total admiration and respect for Shanahan's ability. And um, it really comes down to, it's like sales. You buy
Mm-hmm.
from who you like, and a head coach is no more. He's got an agenda. You're selling your plan. You got a plan every day. You got a plan every week. You got a plan every season, and you have themes, and you have to sell your themes to your players. And then it comes down to how hard you guys work, or how hard do you get guys to work. Well, I always felt like Shanahan's teams play consistently hard. I don't see the Niners jaking it. I think they bring great energy week after week after week. I don't see that in every spot in the NFL. So that's one reason I would call Shanahan a great leader. But the other reason is guys have to buy in. This is not college sports. You cannot hold their scholarship over their head. I'll yank it. I'll yank it. No, you can't do that. This is pro football. These guys show up with briefcases and
Yeah.
laptops and millions of dollars in the bank,
Right.
and they're men. So you have to sell your plan. And to sell it effectively, Vish, you have to have like and trust. Your trust is based on what you know, but your like is who you are. And the players like and trust Shanahan across the board because they like who he is, and then they trust that his plan works. So it's really, so he's an effective salesperson to a number of different people that come into his room. They buy in because they know that he knows his offense produces points, and he's a likable, cool, easygoing guy. Now, does he? Some leaders are better at like taking the blame, and I don't think Shanahan's great at being like, it's on me. It's all on me. Some of that's bullshit, by the way. When coaches
Yeah.
step to the podium,
Yeah.
it's on me. What they really mean, it's on me not to yell at my assistant coaches who didn't yell at the players. It's really on the fucking players, but I'm going to say it's on me because it sounds good. Shanahan's not good at saying, "Hey man, it's all on me." I get that. And Grant goes at him for that. But that's just how the dude's wired. As far as does he sell his program to the players consistently, and do they buy in and do they play hard? Yes. And that is why he's a leader.
So I think first thing I want to say is that I think the conversation is fair. Like, I've had this conversation so many different times with Grant that I know the points he makes. And they are fair points. You certainly cannot dismiss them, right? And he basically, like you mentioned, what he goes at for Shanahan not being the best at taking public culpability it's a real thing. Shanahan gets very
Yeah.
defensive when he's questioned,
Yes.
and he's not questioned really enough or pressed, so he's able to get away with being defensive for it. So that's a very real point. That's undeniable. Now, commenting about leaderships of head coaches, to me, it's sometimes a very, very difficult exercise, because a lot of people project based on how coaches present themselves publicly and based on their childhood experiences playing a sport, what they think good leadership is from a coach, right? So the coaches that come onto the mic and say, like McVay, it sounds really, really good when McVay comes to the mic and says, "Hey, it was on me. It was my fault. I got to be better. It starts with me," right? And he repeats that answer 8 different times. It sounds great. But really, for players, it doesn't matter if McVay does that publicly. It does matter to some extent, but the leadership inside the building is really where the coach is going to make a difference. And like you mentioned, Shanahan has real buy-in from his players. They believe in his philosophy. They believe in him as a person. They believe in his mindset. They believe in his work ethic. They feed off his work ethic. That he's created a culture that I think you can't create without some level of leadership. So to me, definitely is a good leader. Now, how good a leader, all of that, I think it becomes hard for us to talk about Larry because we're not there being led by Shanahan and getting led. Like, I think a lot of people think like being a rah-rah coach because like the rah-rah coach was what got them going at 8 years old and 9 years old when they played sports is like the good leader coach. But that's not necessarily the case. Imagine Shanahan is kind of your boss at work for an adult, right? It's a little bit different. And how do you want your boss to interact with you? And in a lot of ways, your boss is leading you and your team, right? And similarly, Shanahan is leading this group of 53 adults who all make money, who are all feeding their family. And so I don't necessarily think you have to be rah-rah or cliche to be a very good leader. I don't find Shanahan to be that. I think Shanahan's leadership is rooted in his authenticity, and we've seen so many players talk about that honesty. Now, is he a perfect leader, Larry? I cannot say that. It's impossible to say. But do I think he is a leader? Absolutely. This is a team that's
You're
been
only a
very
leader if
successful.
people will
Yeah.
follow. I've had this conversation with Grant. You could argue that like go ask Jimmy Garoppolo right now if he thinks Shanahan's a good leader. Go ask some of the because I think he is tough on the quarterbacks and he expects a lot from the
Yeah.
quarterback. And he doesn't coddle the quarterback or really anybody. Now he doesn't run them down in the media, but he doesn't coddle them or cover for them. And I don't think Shanahan loves being questioned, but overall, it really just comes down to, does his team freaking play hard consistently? And the answer is yes. And
Yes.
that's number one. And the number two is if you went around the room and talked to all the guys on the team on the record or off the record, would they say, yeah, we like that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, we believe in him. To me, it's like, do you like him? That matters. Do you believe in him? That also matters. You can't have one without the other. So, do you like him? Do you believe in him? And are you playing hard for him? And to me, all three boxes are checked. So you want to, talk about he's not the ideal leader and this and that. He's not the smoothest guy as far as, his public
Right.
presentation. But that's because he's a real football guy. He's sitting there, he's watching film, he's devising plays. So I
He's 100%
personally
bought in.
I got no problem with Shanahan. I don't think they ought to fire him. I don't think they ought to replace him. I think he's one of the better coaches in the NFL. I think they're lucky to have him. I don't think he's modern day Bill Walsh, but at the same time, I think he's on the grand scheme of coaches, he's probably top 5, top 6 in that range.
Yeah.
I'd rather have him than a couple guys who have won Super Bowls. Like if you ask me, would you rather have Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, or Kyle Shanahan? I'd take Kyle Shanahan. And yet those
Today,
guys
yeah,
have
I
won
would take
rings.
Shanahan.
Yeah.
Today, definitely
So
with where the
I think
NFL
he's
is
a top
going,
5 head
100%.
coach. That's where I think he sits, top 5.
And I agree with all those points, Larry. I also do think when Grant brings up the conversation about leadership in Shanahan, I don't necessarily think he's saying Shanahan has no leadership ability because you can't have the level of success and build the culture that he's built with coaches and players without having leadership ability. I think he's asking the question, is his leadership ability what's not allowed him to win a Super Bowl? He's been so close for so many years and he's not. And that's a different conversation, probably when we're not an hour and 48 minutes into a show, Larry. That's probably a much more nuanced conversation for another day. Now, with Shanahan and his leadership, the one thing I will say, Larry, that I've noticed that maybe I don't even know if I would call it a flaw, but it's an observation I've had, is that sometimes I feel like he thinks because his delivery is from a genuine place to players, it means that they can't necessarily misunderstand his delivery, right? There was a complete disconnect with him and Brandon Ayuk on what was going on with the situation. They had to hash it out. Ayuk didn't necessarily seem to be aware of what Shanahan was upset. There was a disconnect with him and Dante Pettis. There's been a few disconnects with him and players, and sometimes I think that that disconnect exists because he's so direct and authentic in his communication, and he communicates in a way that he understands is blunt, but he also understands that, hey, I'm always communicating from the standpoint that I care about the player and I want the player to get better and I care about the football team. And so therefore, even if my delivery isn't the best, that's okay because I'm right because it comes from a genuine place. I do think that if there's something he could improve on, it's that. But Larry, he's also what, 44 years old? He's 6 years into doing this job. There's also growth that's going to go with him every single year. Like, I understand that he's already amongst the very best at his position, but I also look at it as he's also got to grow. And third string all pro brings up a good point. Communication is mutual. It goes both ways. These are adults communicating. So it does go both ways there. I think it's a very, again, it's a very, very nuanced conversation, Larry, but I don't see evidence that presents him not being a leader. You don't create the culture that he has created. And like you said, all a leader needs is people willing to follow him. And these players and coaches do believe in him. That part is completely clear.
And, he's direct. He's direct. I mean, that whole conversation that when Jimmy Ward went on IG and talked about Kyle and what Kyle said to him and this and that, Kyle's got to sell to his players what he thinks is the best plan to win. That plan includes play calling, play sequencing, and personnel implementation. And if you feel like after Emmanuel Mosley goes down that your best 4 DBs include Tayshaun Gibson at free safety, and you feel like you can move Jimmy to the nickel, you don't give a crap about Jimmy and his contract and how he's going to look on film and this and that. You're just trying to put your best guys on the field to win games.
Right.
And so he had to sell it. So, I mean, everybody made a big reaction to that. Like, oh my God, what a terrible thing. That was, you're going to put your best players on the field and you're going to say whatever you need to say to make it all work. But you will put your best players on the field. There is no such thing as an NFL head coach who just doesn't put his best players out there because of feelings and he doesn't want to have hard conversations and got to be kind of awkward. No, you put your best players on the field and you figure out a way to communicate it any way you need to. And that's what he did. And so I've had many interviews with Shanahan. And I've talked to him. I've asked him some very direct questions, and he's given me some very direct answers. So to me, he's never sidestepped anything that I've ever asked him. You know me, Vish. I've asked some very tough, direct questions. He's never sidestepped it and not answered it. He's always pretty much given you a straight answer. So I got no issues with the way Shanahan comes across to the players, the media, or anybody else. I think the Niners, in a lot of ways, I know this comes off as rah-rah, but I think they're lucky to have him, to be honest.